At a billionaire's glittering dinner, under chandeliers worth more than most homes, a maid poured wine unnoticed. She blended into the silence like every night before until a single page slid across the table. The CEO laughed arrogantly and flaunted the contract, but in that instant her eyes froze. The signature etched at the bottom wasn't random ink. It was her father's handwriting, her father who had died 10 years ago. What happened next turned the room upside down, shattered a billionaire's pride, and exposed secrets that could topple an empire. The restaurant glowed like a jewel box, crystal chandeliers dripping light across marble floors, rich mahogany tables gleaming under soft amber lamps. It was the kind of place few could enter, without an invitation or a bank account large enough to bend gravity. At the center of the room, beneath the longest table, sat billionaire CEO Charles Whitmore. Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, and smug in the way only men who have never known rejection can be. Every gesture of his hand was followed by soft laughter, every pause an invitation for others to lean closer, hoping proximity might buy them power. At the edges of the room, invisible in neatly pressed black uniforms, the waitstaff moved silently, refilling glasses, delivering rare vintages of wine, whisking away plates before crumbs dared to rest too long. Among them was Naomi Brooks, a young black woman with almond eyes and a dancer's balance to her movements. She carried herself with precision, each step tucked into silence, as if she had been born to navigate spaces that ignored her existence. But Naomi wasn't born for silence. As she moved between tables, the chatter reached her without effort. She had learned to listen without seeming to. Powerful men often mistook help for absence, and said things believing no one of consequence was listening. She catalogued words, tones, the arrogance that slid like butter across their conversations. Wealth made them reckless, and recklessness left trails. Tonight, though, the arrogance had sharpened into theater. Midway through the dinner, Charles Whitmore tapped his knuckles against his glass and smirked at the men orbiting him. "Gentlemen," he said, "and ladies, if you don't mind, tonight I sign away one more empire." Another acquisition finished, another competitor swallowed whole. His friends cheered softly, glasses lifted in admiration. Charles reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a leather folder, one Naomi recognized instantly as the kind protectors only opened at moments meant for performance. He slid a thick contract out and spread it across the table, lightly tapping the last page with his gold-capped pen. "Look at this signature," Charles gloated. Smooth, precise, the ink still drying from the final hand that mattered. All it takes is one man's name, and companies, people, entire futures bend overnight. "I buy and they obey," he laughed, the sound carrying across the polished wood like a blade scraping metal. He tilted the folder toward his guests so they could admire the signature swirling across the page, the final flourish of control. Naomi passed beside them just as he tapped the page with the back of the pen. Her tray balanced effortlessly in one hand, her expression composed, but when her eyes brushed the document, innocently, accidentally it happened. Her breath caught. The ink on the page, the swooping curves, the crosshatch of the final letters. They weren't signatures she had only read tonight. She had seen that writing before. She had seen it across notebooks in her childhood, on birthday cards signed with care, on faded letters tucked into drawers she could never bring herself to throw away. It wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. It was her father's signature. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the tray might shake in her steady hand. She blinked once, unsure if exhaustion or imagination was playing tricks, but the truth burned undeniable. Every curve of the ink was his, from the unique slant of the B to the flourish on the S. Her father, the man she had buried 10 years ago, who had worked night shifts and split-second jobs to pay for her schooling, whose life had ended before he lived to see her adulthood. His handwriting was etched into her memory, impossible to mistake, and now it sat at the bottom of a corporate contract on Charles Whitmore's table. Her stomach lurched, but Naomi steadied herself, forcing every muscle of her face into calm. She set a glass down beside one of the guests, offered the automatic faint smile of service, and stepped back to the periphery. Inside, though, questions crashed like tidal waves. How? Why? What cruel thread had pulled her father's name into this world of marble and marble-hearted men? And more pressing, Why did Charles look so smug when the signature itself should have frozen him? She studied the page from a distance, the angle between candles giving her only glimpses. Her chest constricted as realization struck sharper. It wasn't simply her father's name typed at the base. It was forged handwriting. Someone had replicated it, dragged the ghost of his hand across paper to finalize a deal he had never known. Her pulse roared. Memory flooded. Her father hunched over their small kitchen table, pen scratching across bills, his signature anchoring everything with quiet dignity. "A name has weight, Naomi," he once told her. "Protect yours. One day it'll protect you back." And here, in this theater of arrogance, someone had stolen his name. At the table, Charles laughed again and poured himself another drink. His guests chuckled, patted his shoulder, unaware their admiration festered at the cost of a dead man's signature. Naomi's body vibrated with fury she forced into stillness. She was invisible to them still, but she knew invisibility was sometimes the most dangerous vantage point. Her father's stolen dignity lay beneath candlelight, and tonight she could not remain silent. When Charles glanced her way with casual entitlement, their eyes accidentally met. For the briefest moment, Naomi's calm gaze held something he didn't expect: recognition. And it unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. She inhaled, steadied herself, and then, her voice cut across the polished air, aimed like a spear hurled at arrogance. "Sir," she said. Soft but carrying. Conversation stopped. Charles blinked, eyebrows raised. Maids weren't meant to speak uninvited. "What is it?" Her tray lowered slowly to the side, both hands free now, her tone sharp with memory disguised in control. "That signature," Naomi said evenly. "That is my dad's." Gasps rippled across the table. Forks stalled in midair. Gregory's glass slipped in his hand, crashing against the table's edge, amber liquid spilling as crystals shattered to the floor. His face drained color. The silence after her words weighed heavier than any applause he'd ever received, and Naomi stood calm at the center, no longer invisible, no longer background. Just a daughter, carrying truth too heavy to ignore. The glass's crash echoed like thunder in the silent room. Crystal shards sparkled against the marble floor, glinting under the chandelier's golden glow. Nobody moved at first, each guest frozen between disbelief and shock. Waiters paused mid-step, caught between service and spectacle. Charles Whitmore's face remained locked in stunned stillness. His smirk was gone, replaced by something rawer, darker. His jaw tightened, but his hand trembled slightly as it hovered over the spilled drink. He clenched it quickly into a fist as though force could bury the tremor. "What did you just say?" The words scraped low from his throat, breaking the silence. Naomi didn't flinch. Her heart thundered in her chest, but her voice carried steady through the room. "That signature, that is my father's handwriting. His name, his mark. You don't own it." A ripple moved through the table of guests. Some leaned forward, eyes sharpening with curiosity. Others glanced at each other uneasily, unsure if they had just stepped into a theater of scandal greater than their appetites could digest. Charles drew a deep breath, forcing a low chuckle. "Ridiculous," he said, but the chuckle was thin. He picked up a napkin and dabbed at the liquid on the contract's edge with unnecessary care. "Who are you to make such claims? A waitress? A maid?" His voice rose with renewed arrogance, trying hard to regain control. "You're nobody in this room." Naomi's fists curled at her sides, but her face didn't flicker. "No, I am somebody, his daughter. And I know my father's hand when I see it." The room buzzed louder. Conversation grew like static, guests whispering. Was it coincidence? Could she be right? One muttered. She sounded certain. Another shook his head nervously, unwilling to entertain the idea that they were witnessing fraud unfold in real time. Charles slammed the folder shut, his face burning red. "Enough of this nonsense," he barked. "Do your job and serve, or you may leave this place permanently." Naomi's eyes didn't waver. She breathed slow, the way her father had taught her to confront storms, by planting herself firmly and refusing to be moved. "My dad's name was Benjamin Brooks," she said, each syllable sharp as fractured glass. "He died 10 years ago. But that writing, that's his, exactly his. Don't you dare use it to make yourself look powerful." The guests recoiled. The name gave flesh to the accusation. Benjamin Brooks, a story now tethered to the ink on that page. Charles's mask cracked. His eyes darted quickly toward his own lawyer sitting near the back of the room, a man pale and stiff as his starched collar. Naomi saw it, the silent exchange, the unease in small gestures, the way guilt has a habit of betraying itself in silence before it admits itself in words. The lawyer lowered his eyes quickly, pretending to sort papers, but the guilt hung like smoke none could ignore. One guest stood abruptly. "Charles," he said tightly, anger sharpening his aristocratic drawl. "Did you forge a contract with a dead man's name? What is this? Sit down." Charles roared, his voice pitching higher in defense. The fragility of his control rattled the room. Naomi stepped closer to the table. The chandelier's light caught her face now. No longer background, no longer half seen. Every eye was on her. "My father lived his life with dignity you'll never understand," Naomi said, her throat tight but her voice firm. "His name wasn't currency for you to steal. You think the poor leave nothing behind, but even their signatures carry weight, a legacy. You don't get to use his life for your empire." Charles's composure cracked further. He was a man used to commanding silence, but the silence here wasn't submission. It was judgment. Every guest's eyes weighed on him, waiting, watching the fragility of a billionaire unravel under the words of a woman he had believed invisible. A second guest hissed under his breath. "If this comes out, it's fraud. It's collapse." Naomi's chest surged with breath she could barely hold steady. Her father seemed to stand in the room with her, in every line of that forged signature. He had once told her in one of his rare moments of rest, "Your name is your shield. Never let it be taken." Tonight he was shield and sword both wielded through her voice. Charles straightened suddenly, eyes burning with desperate rage. He pointed toward the door. "Get out! Out!" No one moved. Not Naomi, not even the other staff. The command landed hollow, bouncing off marble walls without force. Because this time, all the power had shifted. Naomi leaned forward carefully, her voice quieter but heavier, words falling like an axe. "Fire me if you want. Try to erase me tomorrow, but that contract carries my father's ghost, and ghosts don't go silent, especially not when you're the one waking them." The lawyer shifted once more, his sweat shining beneath candlelight. Gregarious laughter from earlier in the night had been replaced by his muttering, nervous whispers, each guest beginning to recognize they weren't watching an outburst. They were watching exposure. Charles trembled under their stares. Rage tried to protect him, arrogance tried to shield him, but humiliation gnawed relentlessly at his armor. His glass lay shattered, and so, for the first time in perhaps his life, his empire shook from the inside out, not because of rivals or market losses, but because of one daughter daring to speak the truth. Naomi's spine remained straight, her gaze steady. She realized then she wasn't just defending her father. She was claiming his place at this table, in a room that had shrugged at lives like his, and with every second, Charles Whitmore became smaller beneath the weight of that truth. The lawyer's hands wouldn't stop moving, fumbling with papers, wiping sweat from his brow, tapping a pen against the folder as if noise could drown out guilt. Naomi's eyes locked on him, sharper than any question. She had learned long ago that silence, when placed carefully, forced answers better than any demand, and the silence now was unbearable. Finally, one of Charles's guests spoke, his face pale and stiff. "Charles, you owe us an explanation. If her father is dead, why is his name still moving across contracts?" Charles snapped, voice cracking with frustration. "It's coincidence. Common names, sloppy observation. She's just trying to create a scene. She's a maid. That's all." Naomi stepped closer to the table, every click of her shoes echoing in marble silence. Not just a maid. A daughter. "Can't I've been invisible long enough to see things you'd rather keep hidden?" Her calmness struck harder than any shout. Guests leaned forward, drawn in as though this was no longer a dinner but a trial, and Charles Whitmore sat in the defendant's chair. Naomi's gaze slid to the lawyer. "You tell them. Who wrote that name?" The man looked at her, then at Charles, then back again, lips trembling with unsaid confessions. But Charles slammed his hand onto the table, rattling glasses and plates. "Don't you dare," he growled. "Not one word. But power was slipping. Naomi knew it. Everyone at the table knew it. One guest, emboldened, leaned toward the lawyer. "If this is fraud and you had a part in it, you should understand. When this breaks, protecting him won't protect you." The lawyer's face sagged. Guilt poured from every crease. His defense crumbled in a whisper. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The room gasped collectively. Charles leapt to his feet, knuckles white, gripping the chair. "Enough! Sit down! This dinner is finished." But the dinner had transformed already. Naomi's voice cut across his roar, firm, precise. "You used my father's name. Why? How did a man who died a decade ago end up legitimizing your empire on paper today?" Her chest rose and fell sharply, but her eyes bored into him, demanding answers beyond her own pain. Charles snarled, his face mottled with red. "Your father, Benjamin Brooks, was a nobody, a clerk. A pencil pusher who got in way over his head." The words sliced through Naomi's chest, but still she held steady. "He had debts," Charles continued viciously, spittle at his lip. "He signed things he didn't understand. The records may have carried forward. It's not my fault a dead man's scribble is useful." Naomi inhaled deeply, calming the storm inside. "Useful?" she repeated, her voice trembling, now louder. "You used his name as useful? You stole from a man who worked 2 jobs to keep food on my table? You dragged his ghost into your banquet to make you look grander. That's not useful, that's desecration." The weight of her words slammed into everyone. Guests sat stunned, realizing they weren't watching the games of wealth anymore. They were watching the architecture of an empire exposed as stolen bricks. One guest spoke nervously, his own fortune trembling under association. "Charles, if this leaks, if she takes this further, do you realize what kind of scandal this is? Fake signings? Contracts validated with forged signatures from dead men. This isn't a whisper. This is collapse." Charles's face hardened, but his eyes betrayed something deeper. Fear. Naomi took another step forward, no longer servant, but witness. "I grew up on the weight of his handwriting. That signature was my father's pride, his honor. It bought groceries when he could barely afford them. It signed permission slips and tucked me into schools you will never walk into. It painted dignity where the world tried to erase it. And you," her voice tightened, "you stole it." The lawyer dropped his gaze fully now, ashamed. "She's telling the truth. The contracts, some weren't valid. Brooks's signature, it was reused, replicated, forced across multiple deals. We thought no one would," Charles roared. "Enough!" He lunged across the table, yanking the folder away, scattering menus and plates to the floor. But the damage was carved already. Every guest had heard it. Naomi had laid their duplicity bare. The lawyer's whisper cut deeper still. "It's bigger than her father. More names. Dead men validating wealth of the living. Entire branches of this company could crumble under discovery." Gasps again. Guests shifted nervously in their seats, some already pulling phones under the table, texting quietly. Perhaps for lawyers, perhaps for friends on the outside. Whispers no amount of wealth could chain were building by the minute. Charles looked around frantically, realization dawning that his fortress had sprung leaks too wide to patch. His prestige shook and no applause could re-cement it. Naomi exhaled slow, speaking with razor calmness. "You should never have underestimated me. You thought service meant silence. But silence remembers." She bent, lifted one of the scattered pages from the ground and held it into the candlelight. "This wasn't just my father. This is your empire rotting, and tonight people saw it." The guests remained silent, their faces pale. Naomi had shifted the room's gravity entirely. Charles realized it too late. His wine gone, his glass shattered, his dignity orphaned. His hand twitched at his side, powerless to retrieve what had already fallen. The contrast was total, the billionaire shrinking, and the waitress standing taller than any glass tower his money had ever built. 2 mornings later, the story broke. First in whispers on finance blogs, then with velocity across national outlets. Whitmore contracts under fire, forgeries suspected in billion-dollar deals. Reporters camped outside glass towers, cameras flashing, analysts tearing through the company's filings. Words Naomi had spoken in a single breath became headlines screaming across the nation. Charles tried press conferences, his voice thick with denial. These accusations are unfounded, petty, coordinated attacks on my success. But every denial trembled, weighed down by silence from the very investors who once applauded his arrogance. The stock plummeted. His empire, once a fortress, now creaked audibly in collapse. Meanwhile, Naomi stepped carefully through her own world. She hadn't sought celebrity. She hadn't demanded attention. Yet strangers approached her gently in groceries, in streets, in bookstores. People whispered, "That's the girl who spoke." To them, she wasn't just a maid who recognized a signature. She was proof the overlooked could shake marble halls with nothing but truth. One evening, she received a call from a woman whose voice broke softly. My husband's name was used, too. I saw it on documents. He's been gone 5 years. Thank you for making me believe I wasn't crazy. Naomi closed her eyes, hand trembling, heart swelling with grief and validation. Others were out there. Other ghosts scrawled across paper. Charles, meanwhile, sat alone in his vast mansion, lit not by chandeliers filled with laughter, but the dull glow of news anchors tearing his legacy apart. He paced rooms grown cavernous in their emptiness, a billionaire trapped in a tomb of his own making. His friends had scattered, lawyers turned cautious, allies fled. And still, every time he closed his eyes, he saw Naomi standing across from him, voice steady, eyes unwavering, declaring, "That's my dad's signature." It haunted him because it had stripped him more savagely than any rival acquisition. It wasn't just exposure. It was humiliation. He had been silenced by the very person he thought voiceless. Naomi, however, walked lighter with each day. She still wore her plain uniform at her second job, still clipped tickets at the bus terminal, still lived among cracked windows and faded curtains, but something had changed. She was no longer unseen. She carried herself with the dignity of her father's ink restored. Her mother called her one night, voice proud. "He would have been so proud of you. He always said your strength would come the day you stopped hiding it." Naomi smiled faintly into the dark. "I just spoke when I had to." She looked again at the papers scattered across her table. Her father's grocery lists, thank you notes, birthday cards. Each signature curved not as currency for men like Charles, but as the living pulse of character. That night she understood. Names are more powerful than fortunes. They can be erased on paper, but never from memory. And a daughter, standing tall in a room built to erase her, could resurrect a dead man's dignity with 7 words. By the week's end, Charles was suspended from his own board. Headlines confirmed what Naomi had seen. Contracts tainted, empire fractured, reputation gone. His name no longer commanded respect. It elicited ridicule. Naomi didn't celebrate his ruin. She didn't gloat. Instead, she bowed her head and whispered one last time to her father's memory, "They tried to bury you in silence. I made them hear you." And though she walked quietly back into the world at large, her story never quieted. Because the maid hadn't merely exposed a billionaire, she had reminded everyone watching that silence masks power, and once spoken, truth shakes even the tallest towers. And just like that, silence won. The most powerful man in the room was undone by the memory of someone he thought forgotten, carried forward by the daughter he tried to erase. If that shook you, hit subscribe now and turn on the bell, because more jaw-dropping stories of revenge, exposure, and shocking reversals are coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss the next twist.